And we are live for our second episode of Nick Valencia Live. Hello, everybody. I'm Nick Valencia, an independent journalist, a former broadcaster, correspondent, national correspondent for CNN, who, after nearly 20 years, decided to take the leap into independent journalism. And I'm here today reporting live from Chicago. This is where we are hosting our second show on Nick Valencia Live from the city of Chicago. Why am I here? Well, I just landed a short time ago, got in a little bit after, a little bit of travel delays, some travel nightmares. But we got in here because today is the second day of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists Conference. So you see that behind me, NAHJ. It's been around for, I want to say, about 40 years. And it's probably, I'm sure there's people in the chat who know exactly how long it's been around for, but it is the largest Hispanic journalist organization in the country. It does a lot of advocacy. And it does a lot of development, focusing on our next generation of journalists. I've been a member here since 2000 and I want to say 2008. There was a great mentor that I had named Greg Morrison, who was a member of NABJ, National Association of Black Journalists, and he inspired me to get involved. I think initially I thought, if you guys want to know a little bit more about me, I thought I wasn't Raza enough. I thought I wasn't Chicano enough or Latino enough to be part of organizations like this. Growing up in Los Angeles, I always felt like, more of a whitewash Latino. And then I got shipped out to Atlanta and I got my first job at CNN. And I realized that, my proximity to whiteness wasn't really going to save me in this new place I was at. I got asked why I spoke English so good and how long I'd been in America for. I went through all those learning curves and all those bumps. And it was an organization like NAHJ that really helped get me through all of that stuff and through that adversity. If I can, bring that back to the theme that we're going through today. It's the Latino community that really feels like they're being targeted when it comes to President Trump's second administration's immigration policy. We have seen, ICE raids erupt across the city of Los Angeles and as well in neighboring Orange County. Today as well, just before I joined here, we got news that there were raids in Ventura County, just north of Los Angeles. And that's really curious. Because up until this point, we had heard from President Trump that he would be open and willing to listen to new ideas about when it comes to immigration. He had signaled that he was going to leave the hotels alone. He was going to leave the farms alone. And I think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it only was about a day or two before we saw farms start getting raided again after he made that declaration. That's one of the things that we're going to be talking to Adrian Carrasquillo about. And again, if you guys are just joining us here, I'm Nick Valencia, an independent journalist coming to you live from Chicago, the site of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists here, the 2025 conference. I'm hosting the luncheon tomorrow. So if you're joining us here from Chicago, we're having the Enye Awards luncheon tomorrow. I'll be hosting that. But without further ado, let's bring in our guest here. I saw him in the chat. Let me go in and add Adrian, and let's bring him in here. You guys are having a good day here. Let's see. There's Adrian Carrasquillo. Hey, buddy.
How's it going, buddy? How's it going? Good to be with you, man.
Yeah, so grateful for you taking the time. Thank you so much, man. I haven't actually even seen you yet, even though we're in the same city.
I know.
In this hotel room.
I know.
Here. We thought about maybe going live together, but we didn't know how it was going to work out with your parents or if there was any technical hiccups. So let's just get into it. If you could start by just introducing yourself and tell me where you work, who you are, and what your background is.
Well, I was about to be suited just like you. And then I thought to myself, see, people are used to seeing a beautiful man that is known as Nick Valencia wearing a suit. But then I thought, am I going to look like, do I have enough cred to do that as a digital reporter? So anyway, long story short.
The shirt looks great.
Thank you, man. So, yes, correct. We were a little worried about what the connection was going to be like. But anyway, all things are great. I started at the Bulwark in the new year, and after Trump won, I mean, Nick, we've known each other a long time.
Yeah.
I remember covering immigration years ago, a decade ago, and it wasn't really fun, and it was kind of difficult in the sense that it always felt like you had to find a worse and worse story. And I went away from covering immigration. I covered national politics and campaigns and the White House and things like that. But post-November, I think when we were all sort of like realizing that this was going to be like a new world, I thought a lot about what I wanted to be doing. And what I wanted to be doing was covering immigration because I thought this was going to be the top story of 2025.
Yeah.
And so I think what has happened is that, I just basically pitched to the Bulwark, hey, you guys should have an immigration correspondent. And what's cool sometimes about those leaner digital operations, we've worked at places where it's like, yeah, man, Q1 budget is tapped. So talk to me in April. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
cool that in 12 days I had a contract to work with them. But it's been even eye opening for me because I think that um, what has been cool to see is that they have a community, and there's actually positive conversation on immigration, which I've never seen on the internet comments in my life, right? And
Wow.
understanding that what's going on is not good in many different ways, which we'll get into. So anyway, it's been a privilege. It's been a bigger platform than I expected, and I've been really privileged to do it. But yeah, I mean, you and I have been doing this work for a long time, so it's exciting to not just be able to talk to you, but to be able to talk about the work we're doing.
And one of the things that you said I picked up on, that's something that I've struggled with in my career, especially when I got to this elite level of journalism, is I never wanted to be seen as the brown guy covering brown people, right?
Yeah.
I felt like that was a runway that was given to me. It was almost like I was the whitewashed kid in LA, and then I got sent to Atlanta, and I was an ambassador for my culture. And the editors thought, okay, hey, let's just put this guy in immigration. Did you ever feel, or do you feel now, like you're being typecast, or
Yeah.
how do you deal with that
I
feeling?
Funny enough, you and me had that conversation years ago, and
Yeah.
I cite that to people. I say, my buddy Nick Valencia, like no one wants to be known only as a drug war correspondent because you're like, I'm so many things. But I remember you telling me that that was an opportunity that you latched onto at the time. And
And
so
this
when I
was,
took,
12
yeah,
years ago when I was, covering the narco beat. I had that's how I cut my teeth at CNN. I got
exactly.
noticed by going into a drug cartel bar in Tijuana, going into Ciudad Juarez at the height of the crime. So yeah, I just wanted to give people some context.
No, 100%. And I talk to young people about that, where it's like, you don't want to be typecast, but take your opportunities. And if that opportunity involves you being able to speak the language, where you're from, your experience, then that's a plus. That's something you can build on. I have at times, I mean, I've also sort of embraced it. Like I've wanted to do Latino coverage, and I've wanted to tell these stories, first in politics and campaigns, and now fully on this immigration beat. But as we see, it's part of everything that's going on. I mean, it's a huge part. There's even times that it feels like the administration is like taking your attention away from other stuff and being like, "Hey, look at this crazy immigration thing we can do." You know what I mean? So that part and that punitive part of what this administration is doing is we see it everywhere, as we saw with your coverage in Los Angeles.
You come from an interesting perspective because you're on immigration on a daily, weekly basis. This is your beat, right? So when a strike in Iran happens, and all of a sudden every bit of attention that we're seeing on the streets of Los Angeles, we're seeing it lead the A block, not just in local news, but national news. And then we have a potential, World War III. We're on the brink of that. Then all of a sudden the storyline goes away. What have you seen through that through line continue? What is still happening right now that people might not know about?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that, for example, I was going to do MSNBC one night, and then the Iran started getting bombed, and so they canceled the segment. So you and I know that that's the reality of news, but of course, the things don't go away. The trucks, the militarized trucks, don't drive away. So, I've been in Chicago this week, and I wanted to tell a story on the ground about what's going on, sort of the churches that are the front line protecting the community against the siege on immigration. You know what I mean? And so I went to Little Village, which is 82% Latino, the largest Mexican American neighborhood in Chicago. And honestly, it just pissed me off. Like I put this on my social media, but I'll talk to you about it. It just made me realize the Stephen Millers of the world just don't see these people as people. And these are business owners, and these are local people. It's like a Mexican Main Street. And, one of the faith leaders told me that while it's not dead, there's still people there, there's still businesses there, that they can definitely feel that the vibe of, let's go see what's going on 26th Street, that's gone. Because now people are like, well, let's be safe. Let's not be out in these public areas. And so that's what I was working on. That was the first story I did while I was out here.
It's part of the problem with immigration that Latinos, for some people, will only ever be seen as foreigners in this country. I mean, does it? I mean, here I am, a third generation Mexican American. A Chicano is how I self-identify, and people still, I told you, starting this interview, people ask me, they treated me like I just crossed the border, and why you speak English so good? It's almost like our group. It doesn't matter how much we assimilate. Some people are always going to designate us as a foreign group.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think that there definitely needs to be some education. Also, I spoke to Jorge Ramos about this. This is something that I get
Saw that.
really, yeah, this is something I get really passionate about, which is they want the cheap labor of Latinos. They want the labor in the agriculture industry, in the food and beverage industry, in restaurants, in the garment districts where I spoke to the daughter of a man in LA who has been here 27 years. We tell these stories and it's like been here 10 years, been here 15 years. This guy's been working here for 27 years, right? And so you storm a garment district and you take these workers out, or you ambush workers outside of a Home Depot. We want their labor, we don't want them. These are what the things people talk about all the time. They want our culture, they
That
want our
part.
music, they want our food, but they don't want us. And so and that's why I want to talk to you about LA, because as I'm not Mexican American, I'm not from LA, but I know that these people look like me, they sound like me. And so I definitely found that difficult when I was watching those stories. What was it like for you? You're starting a new independent venture and you're sort of like frog splashing into the most insane story of the year. How what was that like for you?
It's what we do, man. As journalists, I think we've had a lot of conversations about this, that it's not with us, it's within us. And after I left CNN, things happened for us, not to us. And I got a job opportunity for a short term project with the History Channel that put me on the streets of Los Angeles just as this social resistance movement was taking off. And so I snuck out of the house with my riot gear. And just as I was at the front door, Rachel, my wife, was like, why do you have so many bags for such a short trip? And then I showed her what was in my bag. And, she gave me the blessing then. She was like, go and just be safe. And when I got to LA, I had the same conversation with my mom. And she said, just be safe. And so that was the only affirmation that I needed. Because I have a very small group, man, very small circle. And that was the affirmation that I needed to just go for it. And I didn't know about monetizing this. I didn't know about, that wasn't the point of any of this. The point was I was basically, without a job, but I still had all of this experience. And I saw an opportunity to give a voice to the streets. I saw an opportunity to connect with people on a personal level, being a city that I grew up in, being a son of the, people who, um, grew up in South Central, grew up in the inner city. You know, LA is in my DNA. It's woven into my fabric, man. If I'm not looking like this, I got Nike Cortez and high socks on, right? The higher the socks, the down in the pool. I knew something was special happening when I introduced myself as an independent journalist, as people were very timid about talking what they were going through. And then once I introduced myself, like, where are you from? Oh, I'm independent. I'm by myself. I got to the heart of the story. There's often criticism that people who are on the streets have no idea what they're protesting or why they're there. Do you remember Prop 187 back in
Yeah.
1994?
Yeah.
Okay, so Prop 187, you remember it probably because you're an immigration reporter, but this was Pete Wilson, governor, a Republican at the time. This was his opportunity to convince the panic population, which has exploded now in 2025, that the Mexicans were coming for your jobs, that they were going to be the entrepreneurs that took over your small businesses, that they weren't just coming here to work, but that they were going to stay and it's going to be a detriment to you. The fear started getting stoked. Prop 187, for those of you that don't know, would have allowed things like this, like teachers to hand over their students based on their documented status.
Yeah.
It would have not allowed undocumented immigrants access to public services. People in the streets in 2025 remembered being radicalized by that in 1994. They remembered being those students in middle school walking out, only for this to come back in 2025. So I think that is the kind of value that I saw, that I got to add, and something that, I'm just trying to meet the moment. Adrian. I'm trying to meet the moment. And as a journalist, I think there's a lot of times that we try to meet that moment. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. And for whatever reason, right now, I call it a God shot, man. This is a very, very successful,
Yeah.
it's been very successful. And that is because I am choosing to see journalism as the ultimate act of service.
And I mean, the reason I wanted to talk to you also, I was going to quote you in my article that I wrote that's coming out tomorrow, and I'll give just like a little quick preview to folks. 6 months into the deportation regime, I wanted to talk to journalists here at NHJ about how they think the media is doing. And you and I both know it's easy to pile on the media. We know that, right?
Yep.
But with that being said, there's reasons this is an important moment, not just LA. Yes, in Chicago a couple days ago, DHS was like skulking about outside the National Puerto Rican Museum. Puerto Ricans are US citizens. And as I talk to people, they're like, we know that, but I'm not convinced that they know or care. So because there's a Puerto Rican festival, Barrio Fest, this weekend, and the Colombian festival next weekend in Chicago, they're like, well, DHS is staging in a parking lot, trying to check out how people come in and out, right? And so people got pissed off about that. And so it's not just LA, it's not just Chicago. There's a budget for the big, beautiful bill that is going to allow the ICE agents to go from somewhere in the 6,600 to 7,000 range. So they're going to be able to hire 10,000 more ICE agents. They're going to be able to create a sprawling, larger detention system to house people. They're going to be able to modernize their fleet of deportation planes. And that's just the beginning. It's $170 billion. And now ICE gets $75 billion to become the largest law enforcement, most well-resourced law enforcement. So if stuff's happening now in Chicago and LA, what do you think is going to be happening 3, 6 months from now, a year, 2 years from now? So this is the stuff that I think is important. I will say to not just like pile on. Of course, the media can do better. I see stuff all the time and it frustrates me. I do like to point to people doing good work. You're doing good work. Daniel Hernandez at the LA Times is a food editor. And so in my story, I write, again, I'm not going to give it all, but I'm going to give a little preview. Like, why the hell am I citing a food editor in an immigration story? Because the story that made me emotional when I was looking at this, at the IG stories that everybody was posting, was the street vendors putting the milk from the horchata in the eyes of the protesters who were being tear gassed. And I was like, that's incredible. And so he tells me that, it's a white woman who wrote the story on the food team. And he's like, and I was like, wait, were you the editor for that? Did you assign that story? He's like, yeah. And so sometimes we can even see it. We can even see it through the story. Like, who the hell is noticing that they're using the agua fresca to protect people? And then it happens to be a Latino in a place of power to assign that story. That is very powerful to me.
People that have the lived experience. What I've
Yeah.
learned in these last 4 weeks is that the audience wants you, Adrian. They just want you to show up as authentically as you are. Uh, this illusion that we are objective, it's the great illusion. I never claim to be objective, man. My measures of success is fairness. I'll tell you what's going on right now. Look, plain and simply, President Trump is lying to the American public. He is lying about going after the criminals. He is going after the cooks. Two of my street taco vendors have been taken in the last 4 weeks. And a third is a man who works for my mom at her house when we have projects. He was taken during that raid that I reported from at Cypress Park in Home Depot. This is how desperate of a situation it is. Pedro is his name. Pedro narrowly escaped being detained because according to eyewitnesses, when the suspected federal agents showed up, they just grabbed everyone that they saw that was brown. They didn't ask any questions. They didn't have any warrants, no documents. They didn't ask whether or not anyone had status in this country. Pedro took off in his car. A woman who took off on foot, they focused on her instead. As I'm reporting, I see Pedro's truck. It's painted in big Mexican flag colors. I mean, the guy's walking or driving bullseye.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, why did this goofball come back? It is economic necessity, Adrian. You know this. He came back again after he did his little drive-through, and it was during that time they came back. The feds came back and they picked him up, and now he's
Yep.
in custody. We have no idea where he's at. They're coming after the cooks, the people that are adding value. Why are you quoting a food editor like Dylan Hernandez? Because
Yeah.
there is an intersection here, and there is a tangent to the very fabric and soul of Los Angeles, our street food. People travel from all over the United States, man, all over the world to come in to get a taste of those bacon wrapped hot dogs, to get a taste of the taquera or the taquero, the taco trucks in every corner. I forget what Republican operative said that, but like when they said that, I was like, "That's Eagle Rock and Highland Park. Like, what's wrong with that?"
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to see what the president is telling the public,
Yeah.
what my Republican friends and Trump voting friends are believing, and then what I am seeing with my own eyes. That's where we lost people. And if the media can do better, we can't look at things with our own eyes and tell people not to believe them. And
Yeah.
so when I am seeing the taco vendor getting picked up who has no violent criminal history, you can't tell me that you're going after the bad hombres or the worst of the world.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question because a very respected Latino journalist hit me up recently. I sound like Donald Trump with tears in their eyes. They were emotional on the phone and they were telling me, Adrian, how do we get people to understand the racial profiling that's happening is illegal. You cannot grab a brown person and push them up against a fence because they are brown. And there was that New York Times story, hey, I'm American, bro, right? And the US citizen piece. Now, to be fair, we know about US citizens being grabbed up because the media is covering it. So I'm not saying that it's a whole failure, but there's a disconnect between the coverage and people understanding what is happening in our current democracy right now.
You
What
know
do
what
you think
this
about
is,
that?
man? That's my
Yeah.
birth certificate, bro. That's my birth certificate, and I carry around this now because my mom thinks it makes her feel safer that I have a birth certificate. I'm a third generation Mexican American, bro. And this is my reality. This isn't to be dramatic or poetic,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, this is to emphasize a point. I'm
Yeah.
emphasizing a point, but like this is every day. And we, I think if we're working in good faith here as journalists, we need to be prepared to have uncomfortable conversations. One of the first conversation I had the first guest I had on my show
Yeah.
was a Latino Trump supporter. People had some big feelings about that. They thought I was platforming somebody who uh, spiritually affected them. You know, it wasn't a good choice for me though, because I have these people in my audience. I feel as though as a journalist, it's my obligation to meet them where they are. And we have a 45-minute conversation. And afterwards, he texts me and says, I don't think I'm supporting President Trump anymore.
Oh,
This is a Latino, right? And now, can I count this as a win? Does my
yeah.
ego want me to take all the credit for it? Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Do I, if I'm moving in good faith, it's probably the conversation part of that. According to Joel, it was Trump's comments about Jeffrey Epstein. That was the final straw about the Epstein list. But I think to bring this point home is we have to have these conversations with people who we are uncomfortable and maybe fundamentally disagree with. Because, and this is one of your points from earlier, the right sees this as law and order. Why can't they just follow the law? Okay, let's apply that same logic then to the poultry plant owners. Do you remember that raid in Mississippi where 680 undocumented migrants got picked up in Mississippi years ago? It took so long for any adjudication to happen to those big business owners. If we are all about law and order, then why is it okay for a conservative businessman who makes millions of dollars to employ undocumented labor and hide behind, well, those documents were fake. I didn't know that. Of course you did.
Yeah.
It's the biggest kept secret in our country that this is how it goes. And it goes back to what you said, Adrian. And I got to take a breath here because it riles me up too, man. You
Yeah.
want our culture, you want our food, you want our what we come with, but you don't want us here. And it's the American dream for me, for them, but not for us, right? That's how I feel.
No, 100%. And I wanted to ask you this
One other
because,
thing
yeah,
too. One other thing.
go, go, go.
The term illegal is being used so fluidly now.
Yeah.
You want to know how I think the media can do better? Why is this term that we put to bed years ago, over a
Yeah.
decade ago? It's in the AP style handbook. We don't use the term illegal. No person is illegal. The act of crossing may be, but why is this now being resurrected in
Don't,
mainstream
well,
copy?
don't even get me started on the fact that this is a civil crime and not supposed to be a criminal offense. And the way that they treat immigrants when they're breaking their windows open with a pickaxe and when they're showing up in tactical gear and masks, it is insane. I want to ask you this, and I actually don't think it's self-serving at all because I get asked this a lot by people. People hit me up on Instagram when they see my posts, and I bet you do too. I wanted to ask you how you deal with like the mental health aspect of this.
Oh yeah.
You're seeing your community, you're the where you grew up, and it's freaking being bombarded and assaulted, and there's rubber bullets and there's tear gas. Um, we're in a really dark moment right now in our democracy, but then you see that it's people that look like us and people being targeted. Your taqueros, for example. How do you deal with that aspect? Sometimes I feel like I can put it on my shoulders and I can do that work, but I know that ultimately it comes out in the wash somewhere, right? Like, how does it work for you?
We have to know when our cup is about to overfill. You know, I learned that 4.5 years ago when I stopped drinking. You know, I used to numb. I had the propensity to numb. I'm not blaming my journalism career on my alcoholism. You know, I'm a recovered alcoholic. A lot of you guys know that. It didn't help. You know, I used to think people's pain was my pain. And in this story, though, it really is. And so I have developed tools that help me stay grounded. I run a lot, I drink a lot of water. I connect with my wife. You know, she is my rock in this. She's my best friend, man. You know, it's another affirmation of why God put her in my life, right? I walk around the backyard barefoot to try to literally ground myself and connect with the earth. And then I also realize like when it's time to go. um, approaching this job as the ultimate act of service is the way that we get through this, because it becomes not about us, it becomes about the people we're reporting on. I'm being rigorously honest in this new platform. I used to tell people I wanted to give a voice to the voiceless. You know why I wanted to get into broadcasting, man?
Mm.
Because I thought I could be rich and famous. Someone told me a long time ago I was cute, right? And then you realize sooner or later it's hard if you're really doing it for the right reasons,
Yeah.
that this is an act of service. And so to put my energy into that and know that I'm helping, that really helps me know that I'm trying. At least there's a willingness there to try, and I think willingness is really the operative word in this. Like, is our reporting going to bring people back from the dead? No. um, have my progressive friends thought that I'm wasting my time on trying to talk to Trump voters? Yeah, but I see this as our place in documenting history. And in the short term, it may not matter what we do. Let's say it doesn't, right? Let's play the devil's advocate and get really dark about this. But it will in the long term, and I am certain of that. I am certain of that. That whoever is looking at this right now in this epic that we're in, this period, will look at it with clear eyes. And right now, we can't look at what's on the tip of our nose. It requires great amount of effort, man.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Everything you're saying, I really agree with. I would just say that, our business, both media and politics, and that place in the middle, there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of narcissism, and we
Yeah,
realize that as we go along. But frankly, like, being on the right side of history for me does matter, and, like,
yeah,
the work and stacking that work at the end. So, like, that's the part where I feel good, and I know I'm good, and I know that the Stephen Millers of the world who hate LA and hate certain communities, and want less brown people in the US, let's just be frank. There's a wave, and it's too late, right? There's things that they can't turn around, though they're trying. So, ultimately, look, I think that just elevating this work and amplifying these voices nationally. And look, I hear from folks who love when you and me have a conversation like this.
yeah,
So
man. Look at the
I think it's
chat; it's blowing up. I love this,
yeah,
man. This is
I think it's really
what a
special, man. And I've always been a huge supporter of your work, brother. So I'm gonna see you later, and this was really fun.
any last thing. I love to end every interview with, is there anything I haven't asked you that you think is important to know, or anything that you would like to talk about? Now's your chance, Adrian Carrasquillo. Thank you so much.
It's a great question, man. I appreciate that. I think we really sort of covered a lot of the bases. I think things are going to get worse before they get better, but that doesn't mean that we have to run and hide under our covers. I think we're going to keep doing great work. What I do know about this administration is they hate when you put things in the light. That's why they try to shut down everything from law firms to celebrities to various different industries to the media and Democrats. They don't want Democrats doing their constitutionally allowed oversight of detention facilities. And the reason they crack down with violence is actually because they don't want any opposition. So the
Mm.
opposition is really important.
Accountability journalism matters more than ever. Adrian Carrasquillo, the immigration editor for the Bulwark Online. Thank you so much for taking the time with Nick
Thanks,
Valencia
brother.
Live.
I'll see
Appreciate
you
you,
later,
man.
man.
See you
Bye.
later. Guys, we're going to stay on here for just a little bit as Adrian drops off. Just to recap a little bit, if you're just joining us, I'm Nick Valencia. I'm an independent journalist. You just saw the second episode of Nick Valencia Live. We're broadcasting here from NAHJ, National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and we were just joined by Adrian Carrasquillo. He is the immigration editor of the Bulwark Online. I said it there at the end. Accountability journalism matters more than ever. And what they're doing, what Adrian is doing on the ground reporting, not just, in New York. You heard him. He was in LA. He's talking to people in LA. He's here in Chicago. It's voices like that in moments like this that really matter. And if you guys really, if you guys like what you see, if you guys love this conversation, like what you hear, please share it, like, subscribe. This is how we're stepping out to give you information that you guys deserve. Journalism at its best is an act of service. And people like Adrian and myself, we really have our convictions in that. We're like the OGs now, man. We've been here. It's crazy to think that I have 19, 20 years of broadcast journalism experience under my belt. Same with Adrian. I remember talking to him when he was back at the upstart Fox News Latino. He moved on to NBC, and then he was at BuzzFeed for a little while as a White House correspondent over there. Now he's doing phenomenal work. Guys, there's so many stories to be told. And just to give you some heads up and a sneak peek of what's going to happen next, I'm going to be out in Delano, California, where next week I will be heading to the Central Valley. We heard President Trump talk about leaving the farms alone. And then just within the last hour, my phone was blowing up with images and videos of raids that are happening in Ventura County as we speak. Ventura County, just north of the democratically held Los Angeles County. Why aren't they going up north to the Central Valley where it's flooded with undocumented labor, as they like to say? But it is also flooded with Trump supporters. Is that a coincidence? We're going to go talk to a football coach who is scheduling the practices of his football players around their picking schedules because the parents of those kids are farm workers and they don't believe the president when he says he's going to leave the farms alone. Those kids are now picking in the fields and then they go practice their two-a-days. For those of you that played summer football, you know how crazy that is. And they're picking in the off time, and then they're coming back to play football, and they're really good. There's another layer of the story, but I'm going to leave that for next week. Guys, I'm so grateful. Last time we had 45 viewers. This time we have close to 1,000. All of you guys stayed on. This is a movement, and we are building it together. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Grateful isn't even the word. You guys, thank you so much. I'm Nick Valencia, independent journalist, signing off.